Labor MP Peter Khalil is controversial. He's getting ahead of himself, above his station, if you like, by saying Labor should wave the tax cuts through when his leader, Anthony Albanese, has been insisting on holding off and trying to force the government to split its bill and delay at least the third tranche of the tax cuts, the ones that don't come into force for 5 years. Still, Khalil is right. It would be madness for Labor to block these tax cuts. Australians have just voted for them. We like governments anyway to adopt long-term plans, and if Labor thinks they go too far or they need adjusting, then they can take a different plan to the next election. Labor should accept the government's mandate on this, just as it was demanding before the election that if it won, the coalition should accept its mandate. The other test for Labor when Parliament resumes in just a dozen days from now is border protection and the so-called Medivac laws. A court ruling yesterday weakened these laws by finding that doctors can bring refugees from Nauru and Manus Island to Australia without even physically examining them. The laws were already a problem, sending out a dangerous signal, as we've seen in recent weeks with more boats intercepted on their way to Australia. Now, Labor just needs to accept it got this wrong. As many of us said at the time, of course, these were unnecessary law changes. They made for the sake of political grandstanding by independent and Greens MPs, and they were always going to send the wrong signal to people smugglers. Anthony Albanese and Labor ought to endorse the tax cuts, repeal the Medivac laws, then they can try and start this new parliamentary term with a clean slate. Now, the debate continues about AFL crowd control and so-called behaviour awareness officers and all of that. There's a game on tonight, and it's going to be interesting to see how the crowds and the security interact over the weekend. But as an aside, the free market think tank, the Institute of Public Affairs, has covered this issue in its latest podcast. Now, this is quite an intellectual and political organisation, and it's interviewed for this podcast none other than Collingwood cheer squad legend Joffa, he of the golden jacket. Wouldn't have picked him as an IPA man. Have a listen.
Lean towards the left. Sadly, there are a minority of people who are extreme to left-wing lunatics. That's what they are. They infiltrate the media and the radio stations, and they push out this message that this is how you've got to think, this is what you've got to say, you can't behave like that. And this minority, the extreme left-wing lunatics, they have a very powerful voice and a very loud voice.
Strange bedfellows indeed. The IPA and Joffa. Aren't sport and free speech wonderful?